Hello. Oh, this is working. Okay. Yeah, the best computer bag that I ever bought in my life was from Mary Lou for $1, and I've used it for 10 years, and it's still going. I have it upstairs. Anyway, what I want to talk about is what I'm calling for today real zero waste, not taking stuff after it's already been through the mill, after it's already had one life, and now it's being discarded. I'll show that what I'm talking about is not discarding anything, not reusing waste in any way, not creating waste in the first place. It's completely different. It's a completely different concept from what you've been hearing. Now, I press this, huh? Where do I point it? Oh, it works everywhere. Okay. So, I do want to ask you for a little mind game here. Forget everything you've been told about recycling, about reuse, reusing garbage, everything about managing dumps. I don't think any of that is important, and you'll see why. So I wanted to tell you why you might want to listen to me. How would I know anything? Another one of those intrusive Americans up here. So in the 70s, I started a company. I took on what the recyclers think is about the toughest thing to work with. All that I ever heard from the recycle world was dispose of it properly. You know, they used to write that on the Pepsi bottles. And so I took, I'm a chemist. I have a PhD in chemistry. And chemicals are my friends, so I have a different take on chemicals from most of you. They're not toxic, dangerous objects. They're extremely valuable, and they're very useful. I called my company Zero Waste Systems, which turned out, I didn't know it at the time, but it turned out to be the first use in the world of the term zero waste. And we took our chemicals from all over the Bay Area. We got tons of chemicals from the Lawrence Berkeley Radiation Lab, which is, you know, a national laboratory. They do more than just make nuclear weapons. And from the Livermore labs, they got tons of money, and so they would like give me crates of brand new, unused, unopened chemicals, and we would put them on the shelves and sell them for half price. So this is a little story. You can read it while I talk. It's about our first success, the one that got me started. I went down to Silicon Valley and just looked around to see what they had. And I discovered that they had this thing called developer rinse, which consisted of two solvents, which they very foolishly mixed together. They all mix them together. There's no reason to mix them together. But they have this garbage philosophy. Anyway, these were completely clean solvents that I went home and I researched what they were, and they were xylene and butyl acetate. They both said they were components of lacquer thinners. I said, great, okay. They're throwing away a perfectly good lacquer thinner, and it was clean too. In Silicon Valley, if there's one atom of sodium, they say, in any of their solutions, it's useless to them. They have the cleanest chemicals in the world, and they slightly contaminate them, and they think that they're junk now, but they're still cleaner than most industrial chemicals. So I sent a truck down. I still remember it coming to my front door on 5th Street in Berkeley, and the driver, and it was this very shiny, I remember how shiny it was, very shiny tank truck with 5,000 gallons of this developer rinse. And the driver came to my door, and and asked, well, where should I take it? I said, take it around the corner, and Triangle Paint bought it from me for $20,000. And I gotten it for free. He said, well, you know, this is pretty great. This is a business. And so we kept up with it. We reused all of the chemicals that came out of Silicon Valley. They very rarely needed any processing, and mostly that was because they had abused them in storing them. But we took laboratory chemicals from all over, and we sorted them and put them out on shelves, and we had the largest inventory of laboratory chemicals in California, all for sale at half price. We kept on with that lacquer thinner scam. We would take all the developer rinse we could get from Silicon Valley, and we just pour it into pint cans, quart cans, 5-gallon cans, and we would sell it all around the Bay Area. And sometimes we sold it back to the companies we gotten it from because they used lacquer thinner. And then there's a list of some of the other chemicals we got from Silicon Valley. I'm sure they don't mean too much to most of you, but every one of them is known to me. I mean, I understand their characteristics and how they're used. After that, I lost control of the company for reasons I don't want to go into, and so I went into telephone consultation, trying to solve people's chemical problems, showing them how if they had made a mistake and mixed two things together accidentally, it could still be used for something else that they hadn't thought of initially. And in the course of doing that, what I realized was that all of the thinking and the theories that went into working with chemicals were applicable to all commodities, to computers and chairs and this floor and those lights that Mary Lou is fascinated with. And they all really obey the same laws, except that with chemicals, they're dangerous, and they are also valuable, and they're also infinitely malleable, reusable in ways that you didn't think of, or that their owner didn't think of initially. And so, so you learn a lot about reuse through chemicals and having to be very careful with them. And so I wrote a book about the theory of zero waste. And I realized what you have to do is you have to go back. You have to go back to the source where commodities are being designed, and that's where you have to make the changes. Once you design something for planned obsolescence, we all know that term, but it applies to everything, even if it's not explicitly planned. I mean, even if it's not, if they don't use that particular term, everything is designed to be thrown away. It's designed to be discarded. And when you talk to people who design things, they say, yes, this will be thrown away. That, yes, it will be, or they say it will be recycled. So recycling is just a green cover for designing junk. And that's what it has become. That's unfortunate. It didn't start out that way. Recycling was a very noble impulse back in the 60s and early 70s. But it isn't anymore. Now it's a cover for designing junk. So, oh, and I use as an example the avian flu. I'm comparing that to recycling. You wouldn't want to just treat the symptoms. You want to go back and have a vaccine. That's what you want to do with every commodity. You want to redesign from the start for perpetual reuse. And at first, that word perpetual gave me it set me back. I didn't want to use it. But over the years, as I've learned to actually do these redesigns and change the designs for reuse, I've realized that actually you can design for perpetual reuse, but you have to be clever. And you have to design not only for one use, two uses, and a couple of reuses, then you have to design for the breakdown, you design for the repair, you design for for disassembly into component materials. You design for everything that might happen to that product in its long life. And then you begin to approach, well, let's say 100 years, 200 years, lots of things that we make. Houses in England have been around for 500 years standing. So it isn't that much of a challenge. I don't mean infinitely, but 100 years, 200 years is more or less my benchmark. And now we get to one of my core issues. The reason that I don't put forward, even though I love thrift shops and artistic uses and the houses that Dan builds, I appreciate them just as much as anyone else does. But if we're talking about the problem of making crap, making garbage in a throwaway society, a society that is devoted to the waste mentality, I want to make a mark in that horror. I want to work with 99% of what's going on. I don't want to work with 1%. And almost all of the talks that you've heard today work with 1% of the problem. That doesn't satisfy me. I want to get down to where the problem really occurs in the initial design of these products. And we don't have time to work with 1% and nibble around the edges and try to mitigate some of the worst features of throwing things away in dumps. I don't use the word landfill. I have never seen any land that was just waiting to be filled up with garbage. That was a term that was invented around the 70s by the garbage industry because they don't like the word dump. They don't like the Anglo-Saxon sense of a smelly, nasty collection of junk that nobody wants. So they invented the word landfill, and now everybody uses it. I don't, but everyone uses it. And I don't think any of us should. We should talk about smelly, dirty dumps. So, as I say, as you can read, we need new ideas, and we've got to change the way we approach these things. And now I want to, it occurred to me that I should bring out this phrase that I keep hearing. In fact, I heard it this morning, which says, there has always been garbage, and there always will be garbage. And people just say that. It's a lazy way of saying, oh, I don't have to think about it. It's always going to be there. Well, a couple of years ago, not too many years ago, people would have said, well, there's always been smallpox, and there always will be smallpox. People are always going to be getting sick. But you know what? There isn't any smallpox anymore. And there isn't, what's the other thing? Well, there isn't much tuberculosis. Oh, polio is almost eradicated worldwide. Things do change, and things do get totally eliminated. Garbage is a blight on our civilization. Garbage, the concept of creating garbage, collecting garbage, managing garbage, and throwing garbage away, or incinerating it, these are barbaric ideas. No civilized society should have any of these things going on. I appreciate the applause. I didn't expect it. And the last thing on this slide I want to point out is that once you open your mind and you stop managing garbage and you say, well, how do we get rid of it? You would be amazed at how the ideas and the answers start to flow, because it's not really that hard. You can identify where the problem starts. You know that it comes in the design for discard, the design for breakdown. You go over there, and all of a sudden, you can figure out you can see how to change things. And that's what I do on my website. I have a section called Projects, and I work out many examples of how to redesign products. And I give the principles behind that redesign. What do you think about? How do you think primarily about function, not materials? And once you open yourself to thinking that way, you will come up with answers too. It's very important to figure out where waste occurs. This is a central point of understanding what this whole process consists of. Why do we have garbage? Why is garbage bad? Why is it a waste? How do we lose control somewhere? Do we lose it at the last minute? And this is where I differ from the recyclers. Do we lose it at the last minute when you throw it into a dump? Or when you throw it into an incinerator, as the case may be, God forbid? No. That's insignificant at that point. By then, the game is over. All of the wasting has already long since occurred. Wasting is really a relative philosophical term. If I think that something is absolutely necessary, and I guess if a lot of people agree with me, then that's a correct use of a resource. If I think this is trivial, it's a pet rock kind of project, then it becomes a waste. It's a matter really of your point of view. Now, if we are going to design things to be thrown away, and then we're going to make them over and over again, what we lose is the making process. When a factory is forced to recreate and remanufacture shoddy goods that could have been made properly in the first place to last for 100 years, and instead they last for 1 year, like an Apple iPhone, and then they get thrown away because they're not cream colored and we want black colored or whatever, it's pretty clear to see that that's waste. There are gigantic factories, and in these factories there are employees that are eating and educating their children and driving and buying clothing and living in houses. All of that is the waste that goes into creating an iPhone that nobody needs because it's only a different color. And that kind of analysis holds for all materials. What's important is designing or building in the function of each product that you're making. It's function which is important. Materials that tend to be cheap, but assembly, human labor, building function is what you have to focus on. Well, I guess you've had a chance to read that over. I think I said the same thing. So one of the principles that you arrive at when you do this kind of analysis is you realize that what you need to conserve is function. In other words, let me give you an example, the most common example I like to give, which is a container. What does a container do? It has actually a number of functions, but the main one is it contains. If you have a bottle and you smash it up down at the recycling center, you've done a pretty terrible thing. You've taken something that has a high function, it has a shape, it has clarity, perhaps, I guess, if it's clear, it has a form, and it can contain whatever it did contain. You could, and if you smash it up, all you've done is recreate one of the cheapest materials on the planet, just sand. So how do you reuse the function? You refill it. And that is what should happen to every container. And a lot of people are concerned about packaging. If we refilled all the containers, we wouldn't be making all of that particular kind of packaging. And that kind of analysis works out with across the board with all packaging. So that's one of the key things that I hope you take away. Reuse function, not materials. And I point out once again, I think I've already said this, once you begin to realize that you need to reuse the function, then your analysis always begins with, well, what is the function of this product? What does this do? And then you say, well, how could I reuse that function? How could I keep that function going? And I can't go into details now, but we could have a conversation if any of you want to have a conversation after today or after the conference. I'd be happy to have a long chat about it, but it's on the website. So maybe now you understand why I would write something like this. Even if you recycled 100% of everything that you think was destined for a dump, you would not be doing very much. You're not accomplishing much. You have to go back to the source and redesign things, never to get into that situation. And this is also insidious because the way that the social system is set up, it puts you into the place where you have to make a decision. Do I put it in the green bin for recycling, or do I put it in the black bin for the dump? Obviously, you don't want to put it in the black bin for the dump. You want to put it in the recycling bin. Is that a social decision? No. It's a delusional, personal decision that you have to make because you're constrained by the social choices that were made by larger forces than you that forced you into that absurd position. But the social force, the larger social powers are not constrained that way. They can design a society that never puts you into that position of, do I recycle or do I put it into a dump? They can design reuse capability into the entire system, and that's what we have to do. Don't be fooled because you have to make a personal decision. That's not the same kind of decision that's made at the higher levels of manufacturing and government. Well, I think this is the end, my last slide, and I just want to make a plea for one really good outcome from this conference that I see, which would be to create a working group, hopefully a Canadian working group, because I've given up on anything that's going to happen in the lower 48. And what we need to do is get a group together that begins to figure out how function plays such a pivotal role, other principles of zero waste, standardization, modularization, many things, and begin to try to put these kinds of principles into practice so that nobody is forced to choose between a green bin and a black bin. Is that all?